Hi yogis, welcome back to another episode of RunYogi Diaries. This is your host Santosh Shiva. I hope you had a wonderful week and you also got some time to play, swim, bike, run, whatever is your thing. Every week I bring you conversations with people who are on a journey of well-being and endurance. I hope they spark some possibility in you, leave you with some tips and perhaps some inspiration to perspire. If you like this channel, consider subscribing to it, hit like if you like this video, and leave your comments below and let us know what you think. This episode is also available on all major podcast platforms if audio is your thing. In the house today is someone, first off, who shares his name with a famous historical figure here in Texas, and who has been running ultras for a long time. To his credit is over 200 ultramarathons, of which 105 of those are 100-miler races. That's right. Including a few on the treadmill. You heard me right. In his blog, he says he runs 100-miler races because he can, because of the challenge and because he enjoys it. He is also an ardent historian, and on his website, ultrarunning we get a ton of information curated on the history of ultrarunning, as well as the Ultrarunning Hall of Fame that he publishes every year. We get behind the scenes on how it all started. How did it become such a central theme in his life, and yet manage and balance life with family and work? The story behind the ultrarunning history, the treadmill 100-milers, and finally, where he's headed next. Let's welcome Davy Crockett. Hey Davy, welcome to RunYogi Diaries.
Hi, it's great to be here.
It's a pleasure. You're one of someone who's been doing ultras for such a long time. But on top of that, you're also a historian who is also writing the ultra history. So there's a lot to learn about from you in this conversation. But before we get into all of that, I'll let you do a quick personal introduction and then we'll jump in.
Okay. Yeah, I'm Davy Crockett, and I live in Utah, in the United States, and for the last 20 or some years. So this is the place where I did take up my running, but I've lived in other places, New York and Arizona, and I have my career was in the IT industry, so computer science, a programmer, and for the past 20 plus years, heavy in web development, search technology, things like that. However, I retired 6 months ago. So I'm 63, so a little bit early retirement, but it's great to be retired. I'm just loving it. Also, I have 6 children, married with 6 children. They're all adults.
Nice.
And 11 grandchildren, and they all live within about 10 miles of us. So they pop in all the time. We get to see them a lot, and they're a good crew.
Wow, that's lovely. And, just a quick remark about your name. The first time I Googled your name, the only search results I got was the Davy Crockett, who is famous in Texas.
That's correct. Yeah. I'm actually named after my uncle. However, back in the 50s, when my older brother was born, the oldest, my mom really loved the name David, and she wanted to name him David, but it was during the peak of the Walt Disney, Davy Crockett era, and she just didn't have the heart to do it to him. But she waited a few years and then she gave it to me. So it's been a fun name. So I kind of adopted the nickname as I started running. I discovered that people would remember me if I went by the Davy Crockett. And in my early races, I would actually wear the coonskin hat that Davy Crockett was famous for, and so that was a lot of fun.
Okay. For sure. In Texas, anyone who knows a little bit about Texas history will easily remember your name. So hey, that's fascinating. So yeah, so we are here to talk about obviously your running journey, and which is full of major accomplishments. So maybe we do a bit of a flashback here and go back a little bit in time and see how did it all start. What got you to running in the first place?
Well, it's probably pretty accidental because I never really liked to run. In college, I started to kind of pick it up a little bit, and I even ran a 5K. I remember there was a fellow in the dorms who was a serious runner, and he kept encouraging me. So I did do this 5K, and he actually did kind of good, but I hated it. And that was the last race I did until many, many years later. I did a 50K. so,
Wow.
yeah, I went many. I've always been semi-athletic. I did a lot of basketball, a lot of snow skiing, and was pretty active. But I would say, as I got into my 40s, I was turning more into a couch potato, really gaining the weight and not doing much. But my path to running was that somehow I got hooked up with a group of backpacking buddies, and I got invited to go on a backpacking trip in Arizona, and I was a total outdoor rookie. I had no experience in the outdoors. I was packs and all those outdoor gear. I didn't know what I was doing, but I went along with them, and I went on. We did about almost 50 miles in a week, and I came home with swollen ankles. I basically could hardly walk for 2 weeks. Pretty out of shape. But each year we would pick another destination and go on these trips. This was back in the 90s, and so every year we'd go on these trips, and I would spend about 1 to 2 weeks trying to get in shape for them. And so what I'd do is I'd run up and down in front of my house, the road in front of my house, like a mile or two a day, and really try to get into shape. And of course, it never worked. And in my group, I would always be the tail end. I would always be the last person. And but then something happened. It was 2003, so gosh, about 18 years ago. That I decided to try to get in shape for a particular trip. I would climb a very popular mountain here in Utah, and I'd never gone to the top of it. It's about a 5,000-foot climb over 7 miles, but it's done by thousands. People do it each summer, so very popular, very beautiful. And I got up very early one morning and went on this trip, and it took me all day. It literally took me all day to go up and down. And some of the young college students would even make fun of me because I would go so slow but never stop, and they called me the tortoise. Mm-hmm. And I was semi offended by that, and that gave me some additional motivation. But yeah, I was in my mid 40s, and kind of feeling that maybe it's all over. I'm getting old. Yeah, people aren't in their prime in their mid 40s athletically anymore. Was stopping to play. I wasn't playing basketball as much, and so, but something happened. It ticked. I went on this backpacking trip, did very well after a while, and then that next weekend, right after the trip, I went right back up that mountain, and I was stunned that I did it almost in half the time because I had spent that week being very active backpacking. And so I kind of committed to myself, okay, I'm no longer going to get out of shape. I'm going to get into better shape.
Mm-hmm.
And so my path came through kind of fast packing, hiking, going long distances. I would even go back to some of the backpacking trips that we had done and try to do the entire trip in one day instead of a week, to see if I could do it, about 30 miles or so. And that was just a thrilling experience. And I did that for, about a year and a half. And I kept getting in better and better shape. Although my problem really was my weight. I still was quite a bit overweight. I had peaked at about 230 pounds and needed to lose it. But then what happened was, because I was going further and further, there was some concern in my wife's mind that I was out alone. Couldn't I find somebody to go with me? And I found a couple friends, and they went with me on a couple trips. But then their wives wouldn't let them continue to go with me. So I contacted some guy on the internet, and he says, "Why don't you go do the ultra races?" And I didn't know what those were. I had no clue. I'd never heard of those before, and so I did a little searching, and I had heard about the Wasatch 100 that's here in Utah, but I thought that was just something that a bunch of crazies did up in the mountains on paved roads. So I was partially right. They were crazy, but it's trails. And so I tried to, I said, gee, I think I can do that. I'll try to enter that race. And of course it was filled. You can't get in it easily, but I was suggesting
back in the 90s,
back in the 90s, yeah.
Wow.
It would fill up every year. But race director suggested that I go enter the Bear 100, which is also nearby. And that back then would only have about 40 entrants. And so I entered it, even though I'd never done a ultra yet. and so then it just started. I found a 50K in Idaho, which was actually on the Bear course, and I went there with no clue. I mean, I'd never met an ultra runner before, and I showed up. I looked at them. I said, "Gee, these guys look like they're in pretty good shape." And I thought, "Gee, I think I can do pretty good." And my expectations were a little high, and I wasn't quite last. There was maybe about 5 or 6 people who finished after me, but I finished. And that was a good experience. And so
that's how it all started.
That's how it started, yeah.
So so it seemed like you were pivoting from fast hiking to running, and how did that feel like at that time? Did you find that odd, or did you find it difficult to adjust to that?
It was,
or was it basically you did the same thing?
Adjustments, because I would try to bite off more than I could chew. I would try to go further than I was ready. So the overuse injuries started even before I learned how to run. I would go for long hikes and develop these soft tissue injuries, and frustrating because I kind of fell in love with it. And another thing that happened is, as I was starting all this, I tore my meniscus in my knee skiing, and so I had to go through the process of a surgery to try to fix that. And I thought I would recover fast, but I had problems in that knee for even a couple of years.
Ouch.
So
I stopped skiing because of that.
I did.
I stopped skiing because after I started running, I stopped skiing because of that same reason. I was so scared.
Exactly. I still maybe one time a year, but I'll stick. I used to hit the moguls really hard, and I was quite good. But now I'll stick to the cruiser blue runs and be very careful. Try not to fall down, because you go, and I stopped playing basketball because I discovered if I played basketball, I'd get muscle injuries, and so everything started to be focused around this fast hiking. At that time, I
Mhm.
wanted to do that.
Terrific. So, you started, but it's been like what? We're in 2021. It's been a long time. You've been at it. You have what? You've almost 105 100 milers, right?
Right.
You almost made 100 milers a thing in your journey. So how did that come about? How did this 100 miler thing actually become a thing for you?
Accidental. I mean, I
Mm.
in 2004, that first 100 miler, I entered the Bear. I did run that after I had done a 50K, a 50 miler, and DNF'd a
Mhm.
100K. But I went ahead, even though I had a overuse injury, and I didn't. I made it to about 87 miles, I think. I was in last place and bonking hard. I didn't know what was going on, and I had to quit. And I decided when I got painfully driven to the finish line that I was way over my head. There's just no way I could do this. And um, said that, these guys who are doing are somehow superhuman, and I'm just a average athlete. I need to quit doing this. But I'd say a couple of weeks later, I said, "No, let me think this through." And so what I did for the next several months is get over my injuries. And
Mhm.
in my mind, I said, I've got to transition from a hiker to a runner. And so I had a mentor, a friend who was an ultra runner, gave me a lot of advice, and I started to learn how to run. And
Mhm.
then I'd say about 5 months later, I finished my first 100 at Rocky Raccoon in Texas. So a less difficult one, although it's still challenging. And I can't remember what I finished in, 27 something, um, 20 26 something, and I was thrilled. I was thrilled. Wow, this is something. And so then I just started to enter more hundreds and try to, for the first years, DNFs happened. I didn't know what I was doing, but little by little, I started finishing more of them. I never had a goal to do 100 hundreds. That's crazy. I I didn't think I could even do 10. But I'm trying to think of how that first in 2006 looks like I finished four of them, five of them, and then 2007 about eight. And so they just start. I started
Yeah.
learning how to do them right, and they started to pile up. And
Mhm.
once I got to about 50 of them, I had a major injury, and I thought it was all over.
Mm.
I said, "Darn it!" And I was just shy of 50. I thought, oh, if I could just get that 50th. But I did heal. I recovered, and then I got to a mode where I could do at least one a month, and I did for several years. And then all of a sudden, I said, "Wow, I'm at 75." And I think there's only about 20 in the world that have gone this far. Why don't I set my goal to do 100? And then I set the goal a couple of years later. I did reach that. Yeah.
Fascinating. So, quick question there on, you mentioned you found a mentor, especially in your transition between fast hiking
Yeah.
to, running the first Rocky Raccoon. And for the benefit of the audience, if you can talk a little bit about what were those key learnings, what did you have to change for you to become a effective runner versus a fast hiker? What did you have to
I
do?
had to get over the rookie mistakes. And the very
Mhm.
early mistakes that I did was trying to go too far too soon, and not
Mhm.
listening to my body. So if you just got that first year, I thought, hey, I had run on trails about 300 miles. Certainly, I could do 100 miler, and that's no,
Mhm.
it doesn't work that way. And so I had to learn how to get my mileage base up. And the other thing that learned was fueling.
Mhm.
Electrolytes, carbohydrates, fluids, how to get that balance, and how to. I had to take salts supplements to help me along the way,
Mhm.
and so learning that, learning how to run at night, all those things that help 100 miler is good. But running. So I had to work with my foot speed,
Yeah.
and then probably the most key thing is losing weight. I had to. I was
Mhm.
still, boy, that first year, I don't know. I was probably still near 200 pounds or more, and so I was serious about losing weight. And the way I did it was to swim. We have
Okay.
a neighborhood pool, open year round, heated by a hot spring, and so I could multiple times a week go swim a mile, and I would do that over and over and over again, and the weight started peeling off. And so once I got my weight down below 190, I discovered I could run and not really have problems, even with my bad knee. I could do it. So
Mhm.
that kind of transitioned me from just a hiker to an actual runner.
Interesting. And you seem to have done a lot of swimming. You did not think about the world of Ironman on that side at all, or?
you know, to me, 100 milers and ultras was even worse, even harder. So,
Yeah.
swimming, as a youth, I was on swim teams for a little while, and
Yeah.
my children have all been swimmers and captains of their high school swim team. Almost all of my kids have
Mm.
been. So swimming has been part of our lives, but I
Mhm.
didn't enjoy it. Swimming a mile in the
Yeah.
pool is terribly boring. It's worse than running on a treadmill. So, after a while, it was just I would only start swimming again if I got injured. So just to keep my
Okay.
fitness if I couldn't run.
Fascinating. So, 105 100 milers, right? On an average, probably 4 or 5 a year if you just did the math. Um, you know, would love to hear about maybe a few of them. What some life changing or your top three defining ultras, in terms of your journey. Uh, can you talk
Yeah, so
to
I've
that a
already
little
talked
bit?
about one of them was that first one, that first finish. I mean,
Yeah,
that was a big deal.
yeah.
I mean, even though I went to work in sandals for a few days afterwards, to hold that belt buckle and to tell my coworkers what I did, it was really it was a big deal to me, and it's
Yeah.
although I'd say for a couple of years, my wife still thought it was just maybe a passing um, thing. I think she hoped, uh, but little bit
A passing
midlife
midlife
crisis. That's
crisis.
it. That's the word. Uh, and I think it
Yeah, yeah.
was, but and I'd say a year later, I had a very poor experience at the Bear 100. I finally finished it, but my crew destroyed my van. They punctured my oil pan out in the middle of nowhere and didn't help me tow it. And so when I finished, I had to
Hmm.
do that, and it's such a sour experience. When I got home from that one, I said, I'm done. I'm not going to do this. It costs too much. I'm taking too much time away from the family, and I said I quit. Well, that I packed away my running gear. I really did. I packed it away, and I would say maybe 2 weeks later, it took 2 weeks for me to reconsider. And so I got going again. But probably the first,
That's
yeah,
not too bad. That's not too bad.
Not
2 weeks is not such a short,
yeah,
not a
I'm
long
still
time.
because I did tell people during that time I'm done. I'm not doing this anymore. Uh,
Mhm.
even though I truly finished a tough 100 mile or I don't know. So then I maybe one of the races that really caught my attention was it looks like it's my 11th finish. I went to Leadville. It was my second time there. First time I didn't finish, and so I had learned a lot about altitude. And I had backpacked a week above 10,000 feet in Colorado the week before the race, and I took my backpacking buddies with me. They were going to be my crew and my pacers, and it
Mhm.
turned out to be just a wonderful experience. I was surprised how well I did. I finished in 60th place, and it just that kind of sparked in me that hold it, maybe I could be kind of good at this, and
Mhm.
and so I set my expectations a little bit higher after that. And then probably the next race that really got my attention is I actually won a race, a smaller 100-mile race.
Wow.
It was called the Moab 100. It doesn't exist anymore, but is in Utah, and a kind of loop course, a trail, kind of mountainous loop course, and I broke 24 hours for the first time in a 100-miler. I go, wow, I won, and so again that got my attention. Um, but probably the race that really made me think I'm actually kind of good at this was I think it's 2009 2010 somewhere around there. I decided to try one of those loop fixed time races. So there's many
Mhm.
on a track. And this was on a very short track in Arizona called Across the Years, and I'd done most of my hundreds had all my hundreds had been all these mountainous kind of races, and so I said, well, let's see what I can do on a really flat, controlled environment, and I decided
Mhm.
to do a 48-hour race. I'd never gone over 100 miles, although some of the 100 milers were actually measured wrong. There's some I did that were probably about 105 miles. So I had no expectations of how well I could do. And in the field were some of the members of the U.S. 24-hour team. I mean, so there it was a highly competitive field that I went out. Make a long story short,
Mhm.
I won the race. In 48
Wow.
hours, I went 187 miles. I go, and I was stunned. I was stunned to go that far and stunned to win because I even quit around 150 miles. I went off the track and said, "Man, I don't feel good," and I went to sleep. So I took about 5 hours off. If I would have, if I would have pushed through it, I could have gone over 200 miles. But it that was life changing. In that, I learned that
Mhm.
there's kind of two aspects of the sport. There's the trail mountain 100s that I
Mhm.
loved, but I also discovered, hold it, I'm really good at these fixed time races too. And so I started adding those in each year.
Wow. And I guess also all the mountain running that you've done got you at a level of fitness that allowed you to
It
do that
did.
as
Yeah, the
well, right?
fitness
Uh,
high. Hey, I even tried I you know, I mentioned that I went from a 5K in college to a 50K in my 40s. I'd never done a marathon. So after a while,
okay.
I decided to try some marathons and some 10Ks and others to help my foot speed. And because of that fit, I never trained for a marathon. Never ever did. But
Hmm.
I discovered that if I just go and did them, I actually did pretty well. And I think in my second one, I qualified for Boston. Did a like 3:23 with no training, pretty good. And so did go out to Boston, I think in 2010, and had a real interesting experience there. But so it's interesting with all that mountain fitness, it actually did translate somewhat to the roads. I in 10Ks,
Yeah.
I brought my best 10K or 5K time was under 20 minutes, so at 19 minutes something. So I was getting fairly fast, and then I was able to bring my
Yeah.
100-mile time down below 20 hours. I think my best was the next year at across the years. I think I did 1940. So never elite, but was getting pretty fast for an old guy. I mean, I was in my early
Yeah.
50s when I was doing that. So I was kind of demonstrating
Yeah.
to others that hold it, it's not over in your 50s. You can still actually be pretty fast. You can actually even win some races, some of the smaller races.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, and those were the early days of, in the sense, not as mainstream now with social
Right.
media, and, there's so much content about ultra running. And back then it wasn't that much. So, yeah, absolutely. I mean, for you to be doing what you were doing would have been a lot of experimentation and figuring it out and doing it yourself. And,
Yeah, I mean,
right.
I finally did
And
get to have association with some local runners. In the beginning, I didn't know anybody, but and there were probably less than 100 in Utah that were doing it. But then I got association. One particular mentor named Phil Lowry, he kind of took me under his wing early, and I would pace him in certain 100 milers to learn and to watch and observe, and that was really important. And then we would challenge each other, and little by little, he kind of
Mhm.
said that I exceeded the mentor after a while. Although he finally got very fast too, but so that was a good, having a mentor truly was important along the way.
Yeah, beautiful. Now, you're a family man. You've got 6 kids. Thick of it. How did you juggle that? I
Yeah,
mean, how did you manage family and all that kind of
yeah,
that volume of running? How
family's
did you
very
do that?
important to me, and I don't know if I could have done it in my 20s or 30s, when the kids were young.
Mhm.
But in my 40s and into my 50s, as the kids were growing up and going to college and so forth, the time commitment was less. But I did something on purpose. And what I decided to do
Mhm.
was to do most of my training while the family was asleep. And so I would
Mhm.
get up, each morning about 4 in the morning and go out in the dark and go do these runs. I would even go run a marathon before work. I would
Wow.
sometimes I would go up that mountain. That was so hard. I've been up the top of that mountain nearly 100 times now, and back then I would get up like at 1 in the morning and drive up there and go do a run up and down that thing, and then go to work. So
Wow.
basically, what happened
Wow.
is by doing most of my training in the dark, really helped by 100 milers too, because I felt very comfortable at night, and on the trails
Mhm.
at night, familiar trails, and felt very comfortable being solo out at night. And so that's the way I kind of balanced things. So I would usually get home, my
Mhm.
wife would still be asleep. So it didn't seem, even though I'd probably, if I went for a very long run, I'd probably be useless for the rest of the day, taking a nap or something, but at least I'd be around. And so that's kind of how I balanced it.
Yeah. Beautiful. A lot of gold in there. And for folks who are listening to this who have excuses for not doing what they want to do, whether it's a marathon or a 50K or a 100 miler, that's an awesome
Yeah.
tip there, right? No excuses, make it work, and that's
Yeah,
that's
it's
a
got to be
beautiful way to
balanced.
do it, right?
If it takes over your life, there's plenty of sad stories where families have been broken up over
Mhm.
this, and they shouldn't. You can make it work if you
Yeah.
work together.
Yeah, and coming from you, that's words of wisdom. You've been there, you've been doing this for such a long time, and you have a beautiful family. So that absolutely is a great takeaway for who all of us who are listening to this, right? And in terms of lifestyle, so food and lifestyle, right? And these are, you're doing this in mid 2000s, not as crazy as today, where you do a Google and boom, you have all information on what to eat and how to eat, and there are like 10,000 methodologies of how to eat a healthy meal. So how did you approach that? Did you just develop
You
it
know,
yourself, or
I'm probably a
was it
poor
books?
example of that because that I didn't alter a lot, because I was exercising so much. I still need to bring in those calories. I didn't go vegan or anything. I did cut out red meat for
Mm.
for some reason. I started taking supplements to make sure I was getting the vitamins that I needed. But I love junk food, and I continue to do that. But what's important is I watched my weight. So to
Mm.
try to keep it within a range, and sometimes I would have to diet or just make sure I'm doing enough running to burn off the weight. But as far as nutrition goes, nah, I and there's been some interesting runners in history as I've studied runners that
Mhm.
some of them just do not go that route. They continue to eat
Mm.
eat probably poorly nutrition wise, but yet run very very well. So it's kind of you know I don't know if I had a better diet, maybe I would have done better. Who knows?
Yep. Yep. Makes sense. And talking about history, right? You are a historian. You've written books on history, and you also do a fascinating amount of work for all of us in bringing the ultra running history to the world, right? And your ultrarunningshistory.com is such a rich information of what's happened in this world. So how did that happen? How did history
It
become a part of
it
your
was
life?
always a part of my life, probably since my 20s. Was just fascinated by especially American history,
Mm.
and I learned how to research. Uh, I um,
Okay.
I developed a passion for family history, so my own ancestry. And I discovered a journal written by a great great grandfather who was in England, and he immigrated to the United States as a teenager. But he kept a journal, and I thought it was fascinating. And so I researched that in great depth, and also learned how to track down all the descendants of this great great grandfather, which was in the thousands. And so I decided to put this
Wow.
journal, this and annotate it and actually publish it as a book. And this was in the early 90s. And then I sold it to relatives, and that was just a great experience in doing that. And then later,
Mhm.
as the internet really got going, I started publishing some tidbits of American history, the migration, 150 years
Mhm.
from the day, what was going on the Oregon Trail and the Mormon Trail, and going out across there. And so I compiled basically three books. Three. There's one I haven't published, but I have enough for a fourth. But and sold probably about 5,000 copies of that. So all of this kind of taught me how to research, how to write. I discovered a passion for
Mhm.
writing, and how to publish on the internet. Even back in those days before social media, I learned how to gather an audience and get them interested. And that actually led that effort. It was kind of an internet startup that had me leave IBM. I was with IBM for 17 years, and then I got hired and recruited by a publishing company, a content internet publishing company, and so I went that direction. And so I've always had a love of that, a love of writing. And so initially, as I started running, I still have, I don't update my running blog all that much, but it's crockettclan.org/blog. And on there, I have a couple thousand articles about, most of my 100-miler adventures. I would write about a 5,000 word report about them. So they're all there, almost all of them. And so pages and pages and pages of all my experience since I started fast packing. And so I love that. And so that developed a audience, those who are interested. But it was probably about 4 years ago that the history of ultra running caught my eye. And what caught my eye was that I had discovered that the origin story for Western States 100 was not the one we love, the one we know wasn't actually true. The whole story wasn't told. It was more of a curated marketing story. That Gordy Ainsleigh was not the first one to cover that trail on foot during the horse race. He was the 8th. And so I discovered this, and the reason why the story is told the way it is, it truly was a marketing effort in the 70s, late 70s, to grow that race and to put Auburn, California on the map. So these are horse endurance folks who started it, and they didn't know the history of ultra running, and they told people they invented it, and they didn't. And so, but started my history in ultra running is I kind of wanted to set the record straight. And so I spent a full year on this origin story, interviewing people who were back then, and actually published the missing story. And I was surprised how many thousands of people read it and responded to it. And so little by little, I said, boy, there must be more history out there. And I was amazed. I said, oh, I had a friend who started a podcast, and I had helped, because I had the IT background. I helped her create a podcast website. And so I went all through all of that effort, learning how to do it. And then when I was through, I said, maybe I could do my own podcast. And it only took me a few hours then to set up my own website. And I just started. I had no idea really what I was doing. And I discovered that, hey, this works. And then I would love researching and writing about the history of ultra. I'd search, because I have this IT background in search. I could search online newspapers, and I knew how to search Google, and I'd be able to uncover all these things we had never heard about before that were kind of lost in history. And so that's what I love doing, putting those things together and having people surprised when they learn about the things that I find. And so it's a great little hobby. It turned out to be a nice hobby that, now that I'm retired, really gives me something to do and keeps me very, very busy. As you know, podcasts take a lot of time if you do them right.
Yeah, totally. And it's such a service that you're doing for the world at large, the running world and endurance sports at large, because there's so much to learn from so much content in that website. And also, it's on multiple languages. I know you use technology for it, but hey, I found that it was in Hindi, and it was in a whole bunch of languages that even I haven't heard of. So obviously that's very helpful. Also, I see that you have this thing called ultra running hall of fame, right?
Yeah.
Which is a very fascinating concept. So talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, so as I got experience with the history of ultra running and was publishing a lot, the founder of the American Ultra Running Hall of Fame, a legend, Dan Brennan, decided that he needed to turn it over to somebody, and so I think he spent many months considering who, and eventually he and his assistants contacted me and said, "Would you be interested in taking this over? We've had it. I don't know how many years he had it, 10, 15 years, and most didn't know about it because it never really was marketed. Not a lot was done on social media to let people know about it, and so I agreed to take it over. So yeah, about a year ago, I took it over, and we did announce the inductee for last year, and so one of the things I've got to figure out here in the next couple of months is who it is for this coming year. And so it's been great. I think almost all of those people that are currently in the Hall of Fame, I had already researched and
Mhm.
knew at least their backgrounds very well, and actually had interactions with a couple of them. And so it seems like it's a good fit. The sport, of course, has just multiplied over the years, and so there's so many good, deserving people that certainly could be recognized in this Hall of Fame. So I hope to continue to recognize them going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you may soon be in a situation where you may have to have Hall of Fame for each continent or something like that, because it seems to be growing across the world.
It
And
is. Yeah.
so you may soon find yourself having to do that, I guess.
Well, and since it is a worldwide sport, yeah, unfortunately, here in the United States, I think most ultra runners think we invented it and that it's mostly done here, and that is a total falsehood. The ultra running is a truly worldwide sport. Even back in the '80s, the number of ultra runners in the United States made up probably less than 20% of the runners worldwide. So what I love to do also with my history is to try to open the eyes.
Mhm.
What went took place in Europe, in Great Britain, in South Africa, and other places that most Americans have never heard about before. So it's been great. And then as I write these things, these these um, these readers come from all over the world now that visit my
Mhm.
website. It's still about half traffic from the United States, but then I get just a lot of traffic from the United Kingdom, from Mexico, from South Africa, Australia, other countries, and India is starting to be a lot of the traffic that's starting to come now too. So it's a worldwide
Yeah,
sport.
yeah. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, a lot of my audience is in India, and I see a huge amount of upsurge in ultra running, and so yeah, absolutely. I'm not surprised at all.
Yeah.
Yeah, terrific. Looks like that's also a fodder for a book. That's that's for you, right? Since you also write books, so it seems like
Yeah,
you'll soon
yeah.
have a history of ultra
Yeah,
running book.
I've published what four books. It's a lot of work. It's a ton of work to polish them, to go through the process of editing and making sure you're obeying copyrights and all that. It's just a ton of work. So I've been a little hesitant to try to take on a book again, but I have one in mind. I think eventually maybe I'll do one at least that publishing through Amazon or somehow can do. Yeah, I have a lot of content out there. I hate for it to just kind of get lost. It needs to be preserved.
Yep, absolutely. So before I move on about what's next in your journey, I do want to spend a few minutes about your 100 miler on a treadmill, right?
100 miler on a treadmill. Well,
Because yeah, for most people, running a couple of miles on treadmill is a torture enough. But seems like you cracked the code and did 100 miler. So tell us, how did you do that?
well, what I learned, especially back, I'd say back about 2010, once I was doing those fixed time flat races and starting to do like 10Ks and marathons and so forth, to really help my foot speed, I discovered the treadmill. It's just an amazing way to train your body to go faster. And so
Okay.
I added treadmill workouts and pretty tough ones. Back then, I didn't own my own treadmill, but our rec center in our neighborhood had some treadmills, and I would go, especially during the winter months, I would go work out on those treadmills, and it kind of became legendary. People would watch my workouts well over an hour, where I'd put the incline up like about 10-20%, and they would just be flabbergasted, and get back to my wife. Do you know what your husband's doing over there? And so I learned how to run on the treadmill. I remember one day I said, well, let me try to do a 50K on a treadmill. And so I brought my own drop bag over to the rec room with all my food and everything that I needed. And I spent a good 5 hours on that treadmill. I mean, the guy cleaning the room just was astounded, and I'd watch all these people come and go and come and go, and probably some of them were a little upset that I was taking up the one of the only 3 treadmills there. But so I learned. Oh, I said okay, and then I can't remember which year. So a number of years ago, someone decided to start a treadmill race, a real race called the Treadmill 100 or the Treadmill
Okay.
48-hour race. And I said, I can do that. and so by that time, I had bought my own treadmill in my basement. And so I set up my own aid station all around my treadmill. So I had raised tables, so everything was within reach. All my food, all my fluids, all my candy, everything, pizza, whatever, is all within reach. And then I set a TV up, so I could watch TV or listen to
Mhm.
music or whatever. And I was surprised what I did. That first year I did it in 18 hours and something, which
Wow.
is pretty fast. And I've done it 3 times.
Three times.
I've done it
Whoa.
3 years. The third year was my best for 100 miles. I did, and this was at age 60. I was over 60. Was I
Wow.
61? But I did a 17-hour, 15-minute 100 miler on the treadmill because I'd learned how to do it, learned how to pace myself, had fans in front of me and behind me, and learned how to train for it, and did quite well. So in 2020, I tried to do it again, and unfortunately, the day before I started, I learned that half my family had been tested positive for COVID. And
Oh.
so there I am on a treadmill, um, kind of struggling. I'm thinking, I wonder if I have it too. And so the stress and the pressure of it all, I got to 50 miles and I quit. So I didn't
Whoa.
quite get it done. But I'm
Even that's
thinking of
incredible.
I'm thinking of maybe doing it again. They hold it at the end in December, in the end of the year. I might enter it again and try it again. And surprisingly, it isn't boring. At least when you're competing, there's your mind is thinking so much about pace and hitting your marks and keeping your pace up and changing the tempo. and watching all these things, these movies or whatever to keep it interesting. So it's actually, I have a good time doing it.
Nice.
But
Uh,
if I
yeah.
go train, if I go downstairs and say, "Oh, I think I'll go train," yeah, I get bored after about 3 miles.
Mm.
But if I'm doing it as a race, I can do
Nice. So, have you been approached by the treadmill companies to sponsor this? I mean, they should, right?
it.
I
Yeah,
mean, Peloton and Nordic should be knocking on your doors
they should have.
because you're making this popular.
Yeah, I've never been one to go after sponsors. I just
Mm.
I could have. I have friends that have. To me, I don't know. I don't want to sell my soul for products, and I especially shoes because I change my mind about shoes all the time. I wouldn't want to be stuck with a certain product, so I've never gone to sponsor, right? But people do, and that's fine.
Yeah, yeah. Terrific. Well, in your running journey, what's next? Is it more treadmill? Of course, you said, but what is? Are you also planning to do more
So
100 milers?
what's next is to try to finish 100-miler again.
Hmm.
So I'm now 63 years old, and I've had a bone problems in my tibias, both tibias.
Oh,
So it's not, the pain goes into the knees, but my knees cartilage wise are kind of fine. But just the old age osteoporosis, I'm having some difficulty with my tibias that I get quite painful once I go over 50 miles. And
okay.
so I'm trying to finish another one. I tried one a month or two ago, lean horse 100, and I got to 75 miles, still within cutoffs pretty well, but the pain was so severe I had to stop. So
Okay.
currently, I am continuing to train. I have my eye on a. I haven't entered it yet, but I have my eye on a rail to trail 100 in Kansas that I've done a couple times, and I think I can finish it. So I've been doing a lot of training. Like this morning, I ran 20 miles.
Hmm.
Friday, I ran 37, I think. So I'm training on flats and trying to get my legs back in shape, and the healing's happening. So uh, I, I hope my 100-mile career isn't over, but if it is, I've had a good run, and
Yeah,
I
of
can
course.
start acting my age and do the short 50 milers or 50Ks.
And you also have you're a swimmer, so you also have
I
that in
could I
your
could
up your
go back.
sleeve,
I could go
right?
or biking.
Yeah.
I've done some of that. I've done some, gone great distances on bikes before I could turn that direction if I really had to. But I still love
Yeah.
running.
That, yeah, of course.
I love the trails. I love the mountains. Here in Utah, the mountains are just right out my back door. They're just up there,
Yes.
and I just love going out. I'm not a social runner person. Uh,
Mm.
so here in Utah, on social media, if there's a Davy Crockett sighting, it's a big deal. People post it on social media because I like to go run in places where nobody else has run before. I
Mhm.
find these places and enjoy the discovery, enjoy doing it, and so that's I kind of will keep doing.
Terrific. Terrific. So, hey, we covered quite a lot of ground. We spent time talking about your past, your present, and where you're headed next. Coming to probably the end of our conversation here, but before we wrap up, I have a fun Q&A round that have
Uh
with my guests. So you ready for that?
I should have watched your podcast more.
I'm not going to get you into trouble, so don't worry about that.
Okay.
No controversial questions, just fun questions. All right. So you said you love food. You especially love junk food, and when we so my first question, which is something I love to ask all my guests, is what's your favorite junk food?
It's Reese's peanut butter cups by far. Uh, I it's just a problem. I eat them every day, and
Wow.
and we even named our dog Reese's. So it's kind of a family thing, and kind of famous. That's and I'll eat them during ultras or training. Peanut butter to me just
Yeah,
really gives a great energy, and I love it.
absolutely beautiful. And Reese's has not paid us to say this in the podcast.
That's right. You haven't heard her barking. She's in the other room behaving.
Yeah. Um, Something you like to see invented that makes running ultras more accessible.
Makes running. Oh, that's a good question. I mean, because over the years, so many things have been invented that makes it easier. For me, when I was doing a lot of hundreds, the big problem was travel.
Hmm.
So, especially during this pandemic with the travel shut down, I haven't run 100 miler for finished one for almost 2 years. Let's get rid of this pandemic. Let's open up the travel and
Yes.
see if we can get better access. But I guess for ultras, what's been good over the years is more access to races.
Hmm.
When I started, there was only 100 miler in my state, and only a couple within driving distances. So what's thrilling is just the number of them, and you would think that they would get oversaturated, but I'm the race director of the Pony Express 100 here in Utah. It's I don't know 17 years now or so. You would think that it would compete against other races, but this will be our biggest year as far as entrance go. So the sport keeps growing and it becomes popular. So
Yeah. Beautiful. Uh, well, what's a favorite holiday that you're yet to take?
favorite holiday, Groundhog's Day? No. Oh, Christmas is family, and so certainly
Actually, my
love.
question is let me rephrase the question.
Okay,
It's,
what vacation?
what I meant is more vacation. Yeah.
Okay. What my favorite vacation to go on would be to go to the Grand Canyon, to which I've run down inside the Grand Canyon over 1,000 miles. I've done some very very
Wow.
long runs in the Grand Canyon, and that's probably one of my most favorite places to go. I love being at the bottom of the Grand Canyon when the sun rises. So I run down in the dark, go to some remote area away from all the mules and the people, and love the peace and quiet and watch the sunrise. I mean, it's just it's a great place to have a vacation.
Yeah. Lovely. Lovely. So one other question that I like to ask all my guests is about if we made a movie of your life, what genre would you put it in? I'm guessing what I think I know what the answer for that would be, but also who would you like to play your character?
Who played my character? Let's see who was it? Fess Parker who played Davy Crockett back in the 50s. Maybe he would be pretty
Okay.
good. So maybe it's the frontier, the wild frontier. So Davy Crockett was famous for blazing trails, and
Mhm.
and and certainly that's what I try to do. I try to find places to run that nobody else has run. And it's funny over the years, and I publish these places, and now people copy me. They go to these places over and over again that now are a lot kind of favorite places for people to run that I discovered and then let people know about it. So yeah, maybe outdoors, blazing trails, Davy Crockett Frontier.
Yeah. Okay, fascinating. I thought that's what you would pick, but as far the actor is concerned, I don't know who that is. I don't know
Yeah,
most
yeah.
people would know or
Back
not.
back in the Walt Disney area, they had they had a series of Davy Crockett's, and there were a couple actors that played Davy Crockett that were outdoorsmen, kind of Wild West guys.
Okay. Terrific. You did well. We learned a few more things about you in the process. We're coming to an end of our conversation here. Before I wrap up, I want to give you the last word. Any last final message for our audience?
It's just, the sport is great. Ultra running is great. We need to respect it, and we need to respect those who came before us. I think a lot of people get into the sport and then they gravitate to who is being marketed the most in the sport at the time, and they think that there's the hero of the sport. No, the heroes of the sport were those who paved the way for us. That in the hard days, when women couldn't even run marathons, yet they were brave enough to run ultras and do very well in it. And they were courageous, and then they broke down the walls to be able to bring the marathon into the Olympics and so forth. The same with ultra running. Even among the men back in the 60s and 70s, they're incredible athletes. People don't realize that there were people that could run 100 miles in less than 13 hours way back then. We didn't invent it. Our generation didn't invent it. It was invented far earlier than us. And so take a little time learning who these pioneers were and give them some respect. Some of them are passing away now. Unfortunately, about every year, a couple of them are gone. And but there's some still hanging on in their 80s and 90s that are amazing people that have such great stories to tell.
Yep, beautiful. Thanks for that message, Davy. Thanks again for taking your time out. Let you enjoy the rest of the evening, and we shall stay in touch.
Okay, thank you. Have a great podcast. Good for you.
Thank you so much.
All right, bye-bye.